Good morning. Everybody here okay in the back? I don't want to use my cafeteria voice. But I've noticed the clocks in this on this floor are like the clocks in my house. You never know which one is correct. So of course I went to the cell phone. So on behalf of the Education and Society program, I want to welcome all of you to this release event and panel discussion on our title that you've probably had a moment to look at. Where are we with the Common Core, and how can we make sure we know more about how it's going with the Common Core and college and career ready standards? So I'm Sheila Brown. I'm the director of the Education and Society program here at the Aspen Institute, and want to extend a special welcome to those of you who braved the cold. It's very cold for DC. So thank you for bundling up and making your way. Also want to extend a welcome to those folks joining us remotely who perhaps didn't want to brave the cold. And we know we've got colleagues across the country joining. So welcome you to what we think is a pretty exciting event, a pretty exciting day for our program. And just by way of context, the Education and Society program, which some of you may know, we spend a lot of time sponsoring conversations with key leaders in the education sector in both policy and practice. And what many of you might know is that we plan and facilitate multi-day retreats with large urban school system leaders like superintendents and chief academic officers and curriculum and instruction leaders. We sponsor day-long roundtable discussions for leaders in policy and practice. But what you may not know is that we also make deliberate decisions to develop tools and resources that we think have tremendous potential to impact the sector, either in policy or practice. And so that's part of what we're doing here today. We're releasing a new tool, a web-based application called Career-Ready Schools. And Mike Cohen, our amazing colleague at Achieve, the president of Achieve, here, wave your hand, Mike, we'll be giving you a sneak peek look at another tool that's under development called the Implementation Benchmark Tool. So Mike will talk a little bit about progress on that tool. And then we'll segue a little bit later into a conversation with a panel of distinguished leaders across the education sector. And then we'll open it up for some Q&A with all of you. So I'd like to start first with proper introductions of the folks on the panel, and they will be moderated and led by none other than our executive director and a vice president here at the Aspen Institute, Ross Weiner. And next to Ross is Delia Pompa, who is the senior vice president for programs at National Council of La Raza. Next to Delia is Amanda Alexander, the Deputy Chief of Schools here in the District of Columbia Public Schools. She oversees all of the work in the district's K-8 schools. And then next to Amanda is Alan Ingram, who's the Deputy Commissioner of Education for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And just want to thank all of you for making the trek here from various places. Sometimes it's harder to be in your own town, Amanda, but know that we appreciate the travel and the time commitment to be a part of what we know is an important conversation. We're in 2014, the standards were released in 2010, and the work is really hard. And we know that you're doing a lot of that frontline work. So we're anxious to get into our discussion with you after Mike and I introduce some tools that we think could be of great interest to folks in the audience and across the education sector. So want to introduce Career-Ready Schools. You have on your seats what we're calling a palm card that gives you a little bit of an overview of what Career-Ready Schools is. I'd like to acknowledge an amazing, small but amazing team of folks who really dug in over the last 10 months with us to design much of the app. And so I'll start with Ross Weiner, was a key member of the team. Lee Capps, who works for us here as a consultant in our program, but is also the founder and managing director of Reach Associates, an educational consulting firm. Amalia Cudero was also a key member of this team. She's a principal and founder of Targeted Leadership Consulting. Maureen Sigler is a senior associate with the Insight Education Group. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge amazing effort and support on the part of our 2 research associates here at the Aspen Education Program, Marissa Goldstein and Patricia Ruane. And so we did a really good job of creating the stuff that is now living in the app, but it was through the support and talents, many talents, of the Anabliss Design and Brand Strategy Group that it became a viable, living, interactive online app. So thanks to the team at Anabliss, Chad, JD, and Laura. You've been phenomenal in supporting us on this journey. And of course, none of this would have been possible without the support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I just want to thank Amy Slamp, sitting here in the audience. She's our program officer. Amy allowed us to work on the work and not on a proposal process. So sincere thanks for just shepherding us quickly through that process. So little bit about Core Ready Schools. So on the screen, you see a screenshot of a text you may or may not have seen in the past. This is a guide that we released 14 months ago called Implementation of the Common Core State Standards, a transition guide for school level leaders. We released that out into our urban school systems and out as an open education resource, and there have been thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads of the tool. So you say, yay, it hit the mark, we did a good job. But on the day we released it, we held a symposium with state and district leaders, and they said, yeah, but it would be really helpful if you could dig in a little bit deeper on the work around the 7 indicators. This guide is organized around 7 indicators on which we posit if school level leaders and their teachers focus, they will dramatically accelerate the work of implementing college and career ready standards. And so we heard the message loud and clear. And then at the same time, somewhat serendipitously, I had a call with a dear colleague in the Denver Public Schools, Susana Cordova, the chief academic officer at the time, and she had just released an online survey for her teachers and principals in the Denver Public Schools, and kind of the light bulb moment went off, and we thought we could translate this need to go much more at a beginning, growing, and reaching proficiency look at each of these indicators using a similar platform. And so that's what happened. So we thank the Denver Public Schools. With their permission, we stole some of their ideas. And so what we have now is an online self-assessment tool targeted to the school level, where there were enormous gaps. I would still submit there are gaps in tools and resources that are coherent and comprehensive enough while at the same time focused to help schools guide this work over multiple years. And so Core Ready Schools enables a school team of teachers and school leaders to do work in 3 ways. Take a self-assessment against each of the 7 indicators. So there are 32 self-assessment items peppered across the 7 indicators. And then following the administration of the self-assessment, the scores from the individuals who take the self-assessment are aggregated into 2 ways. A principal can look at the full school's aggregated scores, or the principal can denote which members of the faculty are leadership team members, classroom teachers being essential members of a school-based leadership team in our theory of action in the tool, and the principal can see an aggregated score from the leadership team. So this version of Core Ready Schools, and I'll talk about another version that's yet to be released, will aggregate all respondents' responses, and I'll show you a couple of the screenshots in a minute. And then from the results, the school is able to use the second component of Core Ready Schools, which is a planning template. So school's able to reflect on, okay, here's where we are, here's where we want to go, and here are the resources we want to use to get there. And then the third component are a set of curated resources that we've had a team that is focused on looking at what's out there, what meets our criteria for inclusion in the tool, and we'll be updating those biannually as we take this journey with schools across the country. So those are the three components. So I want to just show you a couple of screenshots of what you would see if you went into the app. And I hope you do go into the app. It's live today. So what you see on this screen, on the left-hand side, are the 7 indicators. And the first indicator is highlighted with the first of 6 self-assessment items under the leadership team. So an individual teacher or school leader will read this item and make an assessment of where they think their school is on the work articulated in the item. So what you see is a series of 5 possible responses, and they, from first response to fourth response, they grow in complexity and sophistication of the work. And so you could say the first response is a level 1 type response. The second response is level 2, making progress. This is that granular over time look at how a school leadership team grows and develops over time. And so the respondent would go through 32 of these items. And then at the conclusion of taking the self-assessment, there's an overall score. So on the left-hand side, you see a dashboard. And the dial is focused toward the second phase, which is the overall score, if you will, at that moment in time based on that respondent's answers. And what a principal will see is the aggregate of all the teachers and school-based leaders' responses into a school score, or he or she can look at what the leadership team's aggregated scores are. And then you can see to the right where each individual indicator averaged out. So it's a way to get at what I always refer to as the black box in schools, which is schools, they have a set of standards they're supposed to work on, and then they have these summative assessments, and principals and school-based leaders and teachers are supposed to do something very magical in the black box. And so this tool gets into the black box of how a principal and his or her leadership team can focus the work on key indicators of work and over time grow the work on behalf of the young people to whom they're accountable. So those are just a couple of screenshots. You can go on careerreadyschools.org. I just want to raise up 5 key points about Core Ready Schools. I think probably the one that's really important to principals, as a former principal, is that it's free. It's an open education resource, this school-level version of Core Ready Schools. So principal can go on today, self-register, register his or her entire faculty, and they can take the self-assessment. They'll receive an email with their results. They can populate a planning template and say to their supervisor, look how focused and wonderful we are, and I mean that in all sincerity. This can guide the work of professional learning and aligning instruction and resources and family and community. So this is a free and available tool for a single school to use. We also built in the capacity for 10 administrations of the self-assessment, thinking a 5-year span with 2 check-in points for a faculty and a leadership team made a lot of sense. In some places, it's going to take longer. But for those of you who have worked in schools, we don't turnkey new standards in a year. So this tool has a built-in architecture to aggregate and archive results over a 5-year period. A third point for folks to know is we felt very strongly in the development of this self-assessment that in large part, the success of the Common Core will rest on the success of all learners reaching standards, and especially our English learner population, which we know is growing dramatically. So we have prioritized both Common Core, or whatever the state's college and career-ready standards are, alongside English language proficiency standards. So you'll see that in the self-assessment if you dive in, that they're quite a priority across the assessment and the tool. Fourth, equally as important in what is sometimes viewed as a period in education of high accountability and low support sometimes. This is not an accountability tool. So we strongly recommend, encourage, and built this as a tool to incentivize continuous improvement. So it's a way to organize work, it's a way to drive work over time, but it is not our intent that this should be used as an accountability tool. And then finally, we do plan to release a district, more customizable version of Core-Ready Schools, and we're actually beta testing that right now with our close-in partner districts in Hillsborough County and Los Angeles, and DC Public Schools is coming on board soon, as well as Charlotte-Mecklenburg. So just a small pilot of about 12 or 1,500 schools, but the customized version will have the district logo. Our friends in Hillsborough will replace language on Common Core with Florida standards. Districts that there is a fee associated with creating the customized version, they can add indicators and self-assessment items. So that's a year from now, or probably much less than a year from now, we'll be sharing that version of the tool with you. So I'll be around. I'm always around electronically. Happy to talk about this tool with any of you because we're quite hopeful that this can really create some coherence and focus in schools. And so with that, I'm going to transition and hand the mic over to Mike, our amazing, and how many decades have you been supporting high standards for young people? So just too many, says Mike. So I'll just turn the mic over to Mike, and then we'll transition over to Ross and the panel. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sheila. And I want to first of all start out by thanking Ross and Sheila for being just great partners to achieve in the work I'm about to talk about now, but for a long time as well, and for the great work that you're doing to support the implementation of the Common Core. I'm going to give you sort of a sneak peek, I guess, more into our work in process, right, than to the actual tool itself. But you'll see why, and in some sense, the content of the tool you've seen pretty much of already in the in one way, shape, or form in the tool that Sheila provided. So let me step back and start. We've been, as you know, achievers and working with states on supporting the implementation of the Common Core since they were developed, and we, along with a variety of other organizations, including EDI, CCSSO, Aspen in some ways, SREB, a whole bunch of us as student achievement partners have all been working to create tools to support implementation, planning tools, observation tools, tools to evaluate the alignment of instructional materials, et cetera, et cetera. We sort of feel like the Home Depot of the Common Core, if you will. That was a joke. Nobody got that at all. It's a tough crowd this morning. You should have warmed them up a little bit more, you know? Okay, so we've created a lot of tools to help support the implementation of the Common Core for states and districts, and you heard today's schools, to use. And it's been a big lift. Implementation has been a challenge. We've all known that. These standards call for much more substantial changes in the classroom, in instruction, than previous sets of standards have ever called for, right? This is not just teaching to a new list of things for kids to learn. It really does require fundamental changes in instruction, the instructional shifts that we hear about. States have, by and large, been providing much more substantial and ambitious supports to implementation than they have before, recognizing the fundamental changes that are required. Much more attention than they have in the past to making sure there's a supply, or at least attempting to make sure there's a supply of high-quality, well-aligned instructional materials, paying much more attention to supporting directly or indirectly professional development for teachers, less so for school leaders, but that as well, tying in ways that they hadn't before the support for implementation of the standards with the development of assessments that are coming, particularly for the two consortia, to make sure that those are better aligned than they've ever been before. So a substantial effort underway. Nonetheless, couple of things are true. One is the support for implementation, though greater than before, may or may not be up to the more substantial challenges of implementation that we are all facing. Secondly, particularly in the last year or so, right, we've seen lots of debates about how well the implementation of the standards are or are not going, from places to point to where the states have done a good job in leading or local districts have done a good job in leading, to concerns that the implementation's been botched statewide. And that often is associated with the debates about teacher evaluation. Bottom line on this, at least as we've been watching this from Achieve, is that we realize few states really have good data that lets them and the public and those in the education community know how well is implementation going on a statewide basis. Where is progress being made? Where are the challenges that are still being faced? How widespread is implementation? How deep is implementation? That's been the subject of debate and anecdote, but not a whole lot of data. So, a couple of things in that context. Again, from Achieve's point of view, this is something we've been worrying about a bit for the last couple of years, trying to figure out how one would create a set of data tools that would better inform the state debate. And to be honest, the first couple of times we had conversations about that, we gave up. We thought it was too hard for us to crack. We could imagine using tools that were already available, whether it's around curriculum and instructional materials or classroom practices, that were not designed for accountability purposes and frankly not designed for research purposes, and we could not figure out how to build on those in a way that would allow us or a state to collect data at scale. So we sort of put that off to the side for a while. We had plenty of other things to do to keep us busy in this space. But last spring, as the debates around Common Core implementation were really heating up, we turned our attention back to this and wondered, how could we do this? We got as far as making a commitment to ourselves last June that we would spend some time this year trying to figure that out, and one way we would do it is to try to reach out to others who were working on implementation and see if we can't put our heads together and crack this nut. Fortunately, while we were thinking that, Ross was planning a workshop at Aspen over the summer to talk about the implementation of the Common Core. And one of the issues that came up there was the lack of data to monitor implementation, lack of tools to monitor implementation. And so the group that was at Aspen, which included a number of the partners and individuals that we've all been working with. There were, first of all, Alan was there. There were a couple former chiefs and local superintendents there. There were people from Student Achievement Partners, from SREB, from CCSSO there. And we spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out what would a set of indicators that could be applied statewide to support implementation or to monitor implementation of the Common Core, what would that look like? And we started the discussion with the Core Ready Schools tool, with the transition tool, because that basically focused on the things that should be going on at the school level that you would want to monitor in some way, shape, or form, that you'd want to collect data on. And we came out of that meeting with a couple of things. This is late July, mid-July. One was we actually had a draft of a set of indicators. Didn't seem so hard at the time. A couple hours in Aspen, the air is thin, everyone's in a good shape, good mood. It was very easy to make progress on that, quite seriously. Secondly, though this was not what any of us thought about going into this exercise, the conversations themselves produced an interesting commitment, and this is where Chris Minnick at CCSSO really played a strong leadership role. Because he pushed us not to just think about a tool that states could use, but a tool that he could pull chiefs together and get a shared commitment to use. And so we've been having serious conversations with Chris and his team and with the chiefs at the same time. And just this last weekend at their winter meeting in San Diego, there was a small discussion about this process and this work and a genuine interest among chiefs to have something in common. Now, how common, I'll get to in a second. That's not clear yet. But the nice thing is that rather than, say, Achieve and Aspen, and we've been working together on this, producing a tool and putting it out and say, well, we hope someone will use it, there's now a process that we're engaged in, right, to secure the input, interest, and hopefully commitment of state leaders to use, which will be enormously helpful, I think. So let me tell you where this process stands now and what we're looking at. So first, as I said, we produced an initial draft over the summer. We've had several rounds of revisions and input into that, and here's what we're trying to do. We need to create a tool that, on the one hand, is lightweight, right, that states can imagine using, right, at this point in time in the context and environment in which they are operating. And one thing you can say about that is it's not easy, and there's nobody clamoring, right, for more surveys or other kind of data collection efforts. So we want to create something that is really lightweight. Secondly, we want to create something that is nonetheless focused and has some depth to it, and that's why that's the advantage of working off the Core Ready Schools tool, is that a lot of the hard work and thinking has been done. Translating those into indicators that could be used at the state level or on a statewide basis is still a challenge, but not as hard as starting from a blank sheet of paper by any stretch of the imagination. So we are anchoring this work in the transition guide and the tool that you just heard. Third, we're looking to figure out what's the right balance between common across states and flexible enough for each state to customize to its own purposes. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. First, actually, let me just tell you the categories of indicators that we are looking at. It's essentially 7 categories that will sound suspiciously familiar to you. One has to do with school leadership and the way the leadership in the school is supporting the implementation of the Common Core as a part of its overall school improvement effort. Is this being implemented into the overall effort, and is it being focused so that everyone knows what they're focused, what they're working on each year? Secondly, there are a set of indicators about aligned instruction, which basically gets to the issue of how are the instructional shifts being manifested in the classroom. Thirdly, attention to ongoing professional development. Is it A, ongoing, B, substantial, and is there lots of opportunities for collaboration and time for collaboration among teachers, and is it dedicated to focusing on what's happening, what's going on in instruction and student work in the classroom? Fourth, is there an aligned assessment system, in this case a set of interim or benchmark assessments, and both other assessments that are aligned, and with another hat achieve is helping districts make sure that there aren't too many of them. But is there a focused, aligned assessment system? Are there aligned, fifth, are there aligned instructional resources and curriculum that are available in the school? Six, are there effective mechanisms for engaging families and communities and helping them understand what the expectations of their students are? And then finally, a small set of indicators around resources and staffing, right, and technological tools. This is perhaps one of the more complicated ones to deal with. But those are the components of the tool that we are working on developing. And the trick here, again, is to have some consistency across the states, but allow for flexibility where states want to focus more on one aspect or another. Second component of the flexibility that makes this a little bit more complicated is the variety of approaches that states will inevitably want or need to take, right, to actually collect the data. So one could imagine taking the set of indicators that I described and creating a survey tool for teachers and principals, right, to ask questions about how are things going in the school along these lines. One could imagine either doing that on a statewide basis or on a sample basis. One could imagine states that have monitoring protocols, right, for local districts that might well get directly at this in some way other than a survey, whether it's site visits or document reviews or what have you. Thirdly, in at least one state, the chief basically said, look, those are all local responsibilities, right? What I want to do is ask each superintendent, how's it going in these areas? And I don't want to dig any deeper than what the superintendent tells me because they're accountable for this. And actually, when pushed and said, gee, don't you think there's going to be some inflation in the responses? The answer was yes, but then they'll have a harder time explaining the results on the assessment. If they're telling me that implementation is going really well, but no one is actually doing well, we've got a conversation to be had. So you may have you will certainly have different views about each of those approaches, but the reality is that this will work. This will be used if states have some room to adapt it to the particular circumstances and ways that they are already collecting data. And in conversations with a number of chief state school officers over the weekend, one of their reactions was, yes, this is good. Yes, this comment makes sense. Give us a framework. But we also don't want to add to the data collection burdens that we already have underway. So figuring out what they are already collecting, and by and large, by the way, a lot of states have protocols and feedback loops, right, to support their own, inform them about the progress of their own implementation efforts. So where they're providing professional development, they're monitoring how many people are getting it, what kind of reactions do they have to it, right? In what ways can we demonstrate that it's having an impact in the classroom? But they're monitoring what they're doing, right? This tool is designed to, in effect, say, regardless of what the state's implementation efforts are, and regardless of who's helping who, what's actually happening on the ground. So it's a bit different from what they're doing, and how these may fit together is something we're going to be working on. So we're going to continue on this. We think over the next couple of months till we can bring it to a conclusion. And here are the next steps. We are, first of all, going to be spending some time looking more deeply than we have, or more systematically than we have so far, about what data states are collecting and help them figure out how these things can be connected up. Secondly, we're going to be meeting, we have a series of meetings with chief state school officers and or their key staff that are responsible for implementation to dig into the measurement and data collection issues and help them figure out how they could take this set of indicators, right, and actually collect data on them in their state, in their system, given the reality that they face. So I think this will take another few months to work out, and then hopefully we, Aspen, Achieve, and CCSO will have a tool for states to use, and we'll see them start using it. They desperately need it in order to know what's going on. There's not a debate about that. So the issues really are, how do we make this workable for states? And that's what we're committed to do over the next several months. The last point I want to make, this started out as a Common Core tool, but we've been deliberate in a number of ways to make sure that it's not just about the Common Core. That's in part because we recognize that states are now having some state-specific college and career-ready standards, more so than we had anticipated or hoped for. But we want to be helpful to them. But this is also not necessarily content-specific. So with another hat on, another part of Achieve, we're helping states that have adopted the next generation science standards think about implementation. And with a few key changes of wording that deal with specific content, and, content in specific instruction in specific content areas, this tool will be just as workable for science standards as it is for Common Core, ELA, and math. And so we see this as having an immediate need for Common Core and math and ELA, but we see this as a tool that can be used in the longer run for other subjects as well. So I'm hopeful that we will see some progress on this in terms of giving states the ability to pay attention to where implementation is going well, to respond to areas where things are not going well, and to have a more informed public debate about implementation than we've had so far. So I thank you for the partnership. I thanks for the opportunity to share this with you, and I think I turn it back to either
to me. Terrific.
You got it, Ross.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much for the partnership. We're really encouraged about this project. We're excited to share it with folks in development, and we'll turn to questions in a few minutes. And if you have questions for either Mike or Sheila, we'll take those. I want to dive into the panel. First, actually, just want to congratulate Sheila and the team. Really excited to launch CareerReadySchools.org out into the world. Give us your feedback. We'll love it to hear when it's useful. We'll also love to hear your critical feedback. I think it's a really simple tool that can be really useful, but behind that simplicity, there's a tremendous amount of complexity in getting from that idea to to that being on the website today. So congratulations to the whole team, and thank you. So want to turn to the panel, and as Mike said, part of the goal for the implementation benchmarking tool is really to give folks a better sense of where things are going well, where we need to pay more attention, and where the work needs to focus in the future. And we have an amazing panel to give those of us present today a really good lens onto that. So let me just reintroduce folks, and then we'll dive right in. Immediately to my left is Delia Pampa, the Senior Vice President at the National Council of La Raza, the nation's largest Hispanic advocacy organization. Amanda Alexander is Deputy Chief of Schools here in the District of Columbia Public School System, and Alan Ingram, the Deputy Commissioner in the state of Massachusetts. Thank you all for joining. Each of them has really sort of very grounded perspective on this work. So would ask each of you, and Alan, why don't we start with you and we'll come back. Just characterize for folks, what's your work on Common Core look like these days? What's been the big focus maybe over the last 6 months?
Thank you, Ross. I appreciate the question and the opportunity to be here with all of you. For me, probably as deputy, the last 6 months more than anything else has been trying to put the pieces together. So Common Core is one part of our reform work, but there are other parts: educator licensure, educator preparation, along with a rigorous assessment a rollout. So internally, the number one thing that we've been working on the most is trying to do a self-assessment of where we are as a district or as a state agency in our support to districts with the implementation of the Common Core. And I'm often said to the team and the commissioner as well, we have to move beyond a website strategy. In other words, just having new standards that have been adopted by the board and distributed to schools and hoping that things go well is not enough. So it's making sure that we're intentional in taking the time to check and see, reflect, and see how things are going and make adjustments appropriately.
Thanks. And Amanda, let me turn to you. Of the three folks on the panel, we've probably worked most closely with DCPS and with some of the principals who you supervise, and you've done some work with the transition guide that is sort of the content underneath Core Ready Schools. So we'd just love to hear your reflections on what issues emerged when you worked with the transition guide with schools. What work has that provoked in your system?
Well, first and foremost is we use the guide to guide our work in the implementation. And it has really focused our attention on the quality of our academic leadership teams in the schools. So our main focus now, or what we've realized, is that from a central office perspective, we need to provide support to the ALTs as to how they should actually be functioning. Many schools have ALTs, some are far more high functioning than others. And so we've given them guidance around three key areas. The first is that they should be engaging in the analysis of student work using some sort of rubric. The second is that they engage in data analysis to inform reteach planning and next steps in terms of instruction. And the third, which I believe is the most important, is that they focus or attend to their own professional learning. To lead the work of Common Core, we need in our schools a new level of intellectual curiosity. We need principals and teachers who endeavor to know in a critical and pertaining manner, and that is the work of the ALT, and that's where we're pretty much focused on right now.
Great, that's exciting, thanks. And Delia, talk a little bit about your focus on the work.
Sure, we started our work on Common Core early on, developing awareness in the Latino community of the Common Core and the hope it could bring to their children, and then quickly moved into working with teachers and what it meant for English language learners in the classroom. But we're back to awareness, and what brought us back to awareness was sort of, I'll put it out there, the attack on Common Core. But as we got out there and started working in the Latino community, rebuilding that awareness and trying to put the message out that this is good for your kids, we found that people didn't need to hear that. They thought that already, and if you look at polls in the Latino community, they support high standards, they support a good assessment. What we found, though, as we started creating these town halls for people to talk about it, was they were concerned about the implementation issues. So the tools you all are developing, I think, are just right on. And when I hear from folks in the school districts, parents are right aligned with you. They want to know about whether their teachers have enough training. They want to know about whether they're the right materials for their kids. They want to know what the assessment means and how it interacts with what's happening in the classroom. And so it's been, to me, exciting to know that communities can be partners with schools and that they're all concerned about the same implementation issues. So that's where our work's been focused in the last 6 months, doing a lot of media around it, Spanish language media, developing and putting on town halls, and then doing a lot of work directly on the ground with the parents.
Great. So this is really to all of you, and again, maybe we'll start with Alan again, but for anybody, you know, the goal of Common Core isn't to get a new set of academic standards on the books. It's actually to ensure that students are prepared for college and career and citizenship. So curious, Alan, you touched on this a little bit. What are the different pieces? What are you finding as emerging that you have to work on to support Common Core, to just make it succeed for students?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and as many of you may know, Massachusetts has been a leader in the standards movement for quite some time, actually with the Ed Reform Act of 1993. So standards in and of themselves are not new, but as I shared with Ross earlier, there are a lot of other pieces that support what we hope will be improved outcomes for children. And at the core of that, in my estimation, is workforce development and educator quality. So how do we make sure that our educators that come to us are prepared, that those that remain with us and seek relicensure are up to the challenge and the demands of what will be required of them. So educator preparation, educator licensure, but workforce development, educator evaluation, all of those are important aspects. And then making sure that from a state agency standpoint that there is some coherence in how we deliver services to districts. And so, you know, there are a lot of moving pieces, a lot of parts to the reform agenda in Massachusetts. And oftentimes, having been a former superintendent, what that looks like is getting hosed at the district level, because you got all this stuff coming at you at one time, everything's due, and it's coming from different units at the agency. So trying to create some synergy around that and coherence to make sure that it is doable, I think would be the easiest way to say. And then finally, not just the work itself, but what also is important is bringing people into the fold to work with us on the reform work in the agenda itself. And so the relationship piece, but working with superintendents, working with building leaders, working with teachers, working with labor, working with school committees, we refer to them as school committees, but state boards or school boards, and our legislators to make sure that they're all informed about the work and the importance of the work, the advocacy part of it, so that we can all make informed decisions in the interest of children.
Yeah, I think for us in DCPS, new opportunities are emerging at both ends of the K-12 continuum. So at the high school level, next year, DCPS will launch a redesign effort of our high school structures. I can't get into the details because it's above my pay grade, and that's for my boss, Chancellor Henderson, to launch. But I will tell you that we are thinking more about AP course offerings, about the opportunities that we provide for kids in terms of career and career readiness, vocational education. But I do want to go into detail with what is apparent to us is the need at the high school level to, I guess, leverage the leadership and clarify the roles of the individuals in the schools. Specifically, we're thinking about how we can repurpose or retool department chairs, for example, given their content expertise to drive the work of the Common Core. And then at the other end of the continuum, the early childhood end, we're thinking more about what experiences our 3- and 4-year-olds should have to be ready for kindergarten. DC is one of the few states that has a full-day 3-year-old program and 4-year-old program, and we're looking more into whether or not we're getting the bang for our buck. These kids are in school all day for 2 years. They should enter kindergarten knowing all 26 letters of the alphabet and all 44 sounds of the English language, and by the end of K, reading at level D or up. So we're thinking about what are those experiences that kids need in those early grades to support their readiness for college and career, because we know that it doesn't begin in 9th grade. It starts in infancy.
And Delia, is there broader work around college and career readiness that's going on?
There is. There are two populations in particular that we're focused on that the Common Core presents some challenges to, but in a good way, we think it's going to change opportunities for them. And that's the population that is so far behind in school that they are often placed in what's called alternative school. So these are the kids that people think aren't on a college track. And then the other population is English learners. With regard to the first group, it's been exciting to see some of the schools in our network that are labeled alternative schools pick up the Common Core and use it as part of their curriculum and be able to talk about how what these kids are learning is really no different, that you've got to have a different set of strategies for presenting curriculum, for creating the instructional base, but you're not taking them to a different place in the end. And that, I think, is going to be a challenge that we all have to look at. There are many, many kids, as you know, in our schools who are 3 and 4 years behind. And the challenge of having the public and the educational system believe that the Common Core is good for these kids too, and that they can reach those standards is one I don't know that we've figured out as a group of educators how to meet, and what kinds of instruction needs to be in place, and what kinds of other supports need to be in place. I think in the case of English language learners, we got an early start, and there was a good community of English language learner advocates, plus the states really stepped up when it came to English language learners and said we've got to make sure from the beginning they're included, and that we're not just talking about English language arts and math standards. In the case of English language learners, we're also talking about English proficiency standards, and I was excited to see that it's peppered throughout your tool. We still do have some challenges in that area, in that the language ability that is necessary for really meeting the standards at each grade level is something that teachers are going to have to focus on very, very clearly in English for these kids. But I do see very exciting work out there.
Great, and are there policy implications of that? I mean, as Sheila mentioned, and you just alluded to, the English learner population in our schools is growing so dramatically, and it seems like sometimes, while it's now farther up in the conversation on the agenda, we're still sort of behind in figuring out the resources and the strategies we're going to need. So I'm just curious, what are you telling policymakers or advocates that they should be pushing for to address this?
Quite honestly, what we're telling them is don't water them down. We've had too many experiences as of late where state legislators think that the best thing to do is to water down the curriculum to make it accessible for the kids who are behind or for English language learners. So that's what we're saying. We're saying hold firm. Most recently, what we're talking about is annual assessment. We are very concerned that annual assessment is being threatened at a lot of different levels. And for English language learners, that tool has been, in my estimation, one of the most important tools in moving the scores up for English language learners, that there's an expectation on everyone that once a year you're going to see where those kids are and someone's going to be held accountable for their performance. And that's really been important to us on a policy level and will continue to be important.
I was just going to add to your point, but again, the standards are what we expect children to know and be able to do. That in and of itself is not sufficient. We've got to make sure that we have effective teachers in front of children every day that can deliver instruction in a different way. But at the core of it for me, though, is the notion of high expectations for all kids. So, when I think about the standards and what they really mean is in terms of equity, but it's an opportunity to be exposed to good instruction, rigorous instruction, but to help me stretch as a student and to make sure the good teachers are in front of them. Finally, I just want to, again, emphasize poor kids, language acquisition students, children with special needs, all can do well with the right supports. And so as a state agency, our job is to try and make sure that we're helping identify those supports and that they're in place in districts so that all children can succeed. And finally, in Massachusetts, we celebrate a lot of success, first in the nation in a number of areas in terms of outcome and achievement for children. but we still have huge gaps, and we still have a lot of communities, particularly in urban centers, where all children are not experiencing the same level of success. And so our commissioner is committed that we're not going to rest until we have done a better job of delivering on that for all the children in Massachusetts and not just some of the children.
And so just be curious, what are local educators asking for? What are they saying that the needs are? And again, for any of you, but Alan, if you...
Yeah, I think what I hear most, and again, we're in schools all the time. The commissioner visits weekly, and most recently we've taken over 4 elementary schools, and previously we had taken over a district that was low performing in Lawrence. So we're in schools all the time, and there's an opportunity to see the work up close and personal. It's an opportunity to engage and talk with educators from different segments of the community. What I hear most is, one, the agenda is right, but they want more time. They want more time for collaboration, more time to look at student work samples, to get some consensus on that and strategize about maybe how to adjust and adapt instruction to better meet the needs of children. They're also asking for more resources for instructional supports to support the children with the greatest needs. So time and resources would be the big ones that I hear the most.
And I think,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, to add on to your point about the resources, is I noticed that educators are becoming more critical consumers of what we put before them. I think another thing that they're asking for is help on the pedagogical shifts themselves. Teachers are struggling with how to tackle complex texts. They're, learning more about how to ask those text-dependent questions to students, to require evidence-based answers. I think that that is our role as central office leaders, to provide that level of professional development. But I think in schools where it's happening the best, it's due to a really strong ALT. Those schools have taken the core on for themselves. I think it's leading to a paradigm shift where traditionally central offices have been viewed as the vehicle for which new professional development, new things are delivered to schools. But in schools that it's happening really well, these teachers and these principals are reading professional literature. They're deciding that, hey, this is something that we want to study as an ALT. We are going to read this text. We're going to read this article. We're going to learn more about this so that it influences our work in the school.
There's just a couple of things I would add. I agree with everything our teachers are talking about there. They're also talking about wanting models and the time
Yes.
together. So there are a lot of different models out there, but to the everyday teacher, going on the web and searching for these things takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
So they want leadership within their school and in their district to say, here are some things you can look at that would work with the populations we're concerned about and that you're teaching. Mm-hmm. And so they want someone to lead them through it. They want someone to tell them that the materials and the textbooks they have are either appropriate or what pieces can you pull out. They really do need some guidance, and they want it. They ask for the guidance and they ask for the models together with the time so they can sort of practice what they're looking at.
Yeah, so back on, just to stick on this point, Amanda, in your opening remarks, you talked about one of the emphases was principals themselves needing to get that professional learning. And then you were just referring to the academic leadership teams, and where this is working, it's really getting that ownership in the school. How is the district supporting principals to lead that work, to feel confident, to get the depth of knowledge they need to be in that position?
Yeah, well, we are leading our principals through the work of our instructional superintendents, and that's the group that I actually supervise. I'm not the direct supervisor of the principals. So many of our instructional superintendents during their monthly cluster meetings are leading professional development series on the core and the shifts. During their instructional walks, they're using instructional practice guides like those offered by Student Achievement Partners to go into classrooms and look for evidence of Common Core implementation. So it's happening on a cluster level and being led by our instructional superintendents. We've also done district-wide professional development, as have many other districts across the country, but we're trying to get it close to the actual work. The classroom is the laboratory not the central office.
You know what we found among the principals that sort of get it, and the teachers feel that they've got the support of those principals, is they don't see Common Core as a thing. They see it as sort of the driver behind everything they're doing, and they don't see testing as a separate thing and professional development as a separate thing. They really, and they don't talk about them separately. They talk about achievement and bring all these pieces together, and I think that's something we haven't done well, just as an education community, is talk about the coherence among all the things we talk about that are given names, and they sort of take on a life of their own rather than functioning the way they should in interacting and supporting achievement.
I couldn't agree more. The need for coherence, and again, I think about all the reform work in Massachusetts, and but as a state agency, we have a responsibility to try to show how these things are interconnected and integrated and support one another and are not siloed or random acts, if you will. The other thing I just wanted to point out, and so when I think about standards in Massachusetts, again, what we refer to as the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, I think about, again, the emphasis on workforce development, whether that's educator evaluation, whether it's licensure, whether it's ed prep program approval. I just want to remind the audience that it's important that we not blame teachers or that they not feel as though they're bearing the burden of outcomes for kids by themselves. And so we want to make sure that the system is right, and both at the state level and support superintendents in making sure that's the case at the district level without intruding, because in Massachusetts there's a great emphasis for local control, and so we want to respect and honor that. But we want to provide assistance and not be a hammer in overly emphasizing compliance.
So I want to build on that, but also want to let folks know in just a minute we'll turn it over for questions from the group, either for the panel or for Sheila and or Mike. So please start to think about what questions you want to ask. But building on that and the system as a support, I'd just be curious for any of you to reflect on, so what data are you tracking right now? How are you how are you managing the process of transitioning and implementing, and just what patterns are you noticing? What do you see as bright spots? What do you see as areas that really need more focus?
Yeah, in Massachusetts, we primarily have relied on anecdotal information and surveys. So we have a couple of annual convenings that we do every year, one in the fall, one in the spring, where we bring educators from across the community to gatherings. And so there are several hundred there. We've had annual surveys that have gone out in the past, but we try and do our surveys around the events for teacher training or teacher gatherings where we have people coming together. But again, I just think it's important that we move beyond just counting how many times we did PD or how many offerings or course offerings or how many model curriculum units we put up on a website, but how can we have more than just a gut feel, and that's what excites me most about the tools that were introduced earlier, that we would have something much more comprehensive to give us a better feel for how the implementation is going. So as a practitioner at heart, you know, I want to make sure what we're doing is relevant and that it adds value, but it's got to move beyond just counting widgets and trainings and model curriculum units and the like.
Just for parents, one of the, we're not collecting data per se, but in our training with them and our engagement with them, when you see the differences when they start asking questions about instruction in the classroom rather than, they start with, are you teaching the Common Core, because they've learned they should ask that, but then they start to look at what does the instruction look like, and where do you think my child will be at the end of the year, and what is your plan for moving my child into that other book, and things that really are day-to-day examples of progress in the classroom. And when parents know to ask those questions, not at the sort of jargon level, but at the level that means something to where their child is and where their child's going, I think you start to see success and a real partnership and understanding of what it takes to create achievement.
You know, curious, but just before I turn over, but just thinking about that parent engagement piece, and certainly in a number of states, there's a transition in the assessments that's going to be coming this year. There was some field testing last year. I think in Massachusetts there's sort of an extended field test. So you might explain that to folks, but also We just saw in the last few days the Smarter Balance Consortia just released sort of their framework for cut scores and some estimates about what percent of students would be at different performance levels, which in most states it's going to be different than how that data has looked previously, sort of raising the bar and then seeing more students at lower levels rather than advanced. So I'm curious, how much have you engaged the broader community in just getting ready for that, explaining what that means and that as an opportunity versus something that obviously can be quite challenging politically?
Sure. In Massachusetts, our commissioner has tried to reach out to various segments of the community in this work. And so we have brought labor to the table, both AFT and NEA. We've worked with our Superintendent's Association. We've worked with the school committees, or normally referred to as school boards. We brought practitioners in from the field for input. And the biggest cry or feedback we've gotten from the field is involve us on the front end. Don't just come to us after you've made a decision and you want to roll something out, but find a way. And so we built in some structures and routines that allow us to do that. One example would be on the park assessment. So we're part of the park consortium. Our legacy test, MCAS, referred to as MCAS, is been in place for well over 20 years now. We think whether we did park or anything else, that it was going to have to be revamped significantly. And there's some data points that we refer to that tell us that. But our commissioner made the decision consciously that we would field test the park assessment for 2 years. So we did the first last spring. We'll do the operational test this spring simultaneously with our legacy assessment. And then from there, we will glean the information that we think will be necessary to go to the board, the State Board of Education, with an informed recommendation of what that might look like or what it should look like going forward. So we're optimistic that we're heading in the right direction, and we're looking forward to the spring.
On a school level, more practical, this has us thinking about homework and our practices around that, the frequency and the volume, and there being some consistency across schools. And then also the ways in which parents can become involved in that work is where we are right now as it relates to parental involvement. On a broader level, system-wide, our Office of Family and Community Engagement is sending literature to parents, hosting forums, and on the ground reaching out to groups of parents in different wards of the city.
And Delia, have you seen concern or enthusiasm, or what's been the reaction from folks you're working with about the assessments?
There has been a great deal of enthusiasm, as a matter of fact, for assessments, because when we talk to the principals who've had success and whose schools are high performing, they often cite what they use to measure progress every year. And if they didn't have that systematic look at progress, they often talk about the fact that it leads them to not only challenge themselves as a community, but it gives them a measure of what they've accomplished that year. So it's been very important to them. And to parents in general, the tests are really important. They don't know the difference between the state tests and the local tests and park and Smarter Balance and anything, but they do know that they have an indicator of how their child is doing. So if you speak to the community at that level, rather than get into the politics of it, there's a deep understanding of them wanting to know how their child is doing.
All right. I have lots more questions, so I'm happy to ask them, but want to just see, are there questions? If you do have a question, do we have mic runners? So if you could wait for the microphone to come, and if you could just identify yourself and ask a question. So we've got one right here.
Hi, Bob Rothman with the Alliance for Excellent Education.
You're on.
Oh, it is. I have a question for Mike. Will your tool have with it resources that states could use, so if they find that they're at the beginning stage of one area, they have some place to turn to move up?
Good question. So that has not been part of the conversation so far, but one of the benefits of sharing where we are right now is that we get to hear suggestions like that. So I think it would not be hard. We're not likely to develop a whole new suite of resources, right, to go along with this tool. But we do have a fair amount of resources that we've created around various implementation issues, and not just us, but the other partners with whom we work. So at a minimum, I think we can pull together pretty systematically what's out there for states, both from national organizations, but states have done a lot of good work in some of these areas as well. So I think it would give us an opportunity to do that, one that we're more likely to take advantage of now that you've raised it than we were before. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'll just say on that, we did, at the Aspen Institute, we learned from Denver Public Schools, which started with a self-assessment and a sort of resource library. And I think one of the things that was very compelling when they shared that with our chief academic officers and the superintendents we work with was the idea that school leaders were pulling resources that they felt like, okay, I've identified something I want to work on, and now here's sort of a somewhat limited set of resources that are focused on that. So I don't have to go out to the entire universe of the multiple places where Common Core resources are proliferating and try to sift through all of that to figure out. So I think that getting that combination of giving folks an opportunity to identify for themselves what they want to work on, but then also giving a limited number of choices for those. And I'm curious, if any of you have reflections on how have you helped folks find the right resources? I mean, on the one hand, it's the sort of water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. There's so much that I think for sometimes it can be a challenge to figure out what's the highest quality, most relevant resource for me. So I'm just curious if any of you have addressed that in your work.
Part of our work in Massachusetts has been to provide model curriculum units. What we hear from the field a lot is teachers want to see what it looks like, not just the lesson materials, but they also visually want to see what does the different or the changed instruction look like. So we're trying to do some work with WGBH, I think, in collaboration to get some video that we can use. We have some up that's available now, but we're trying to explore how to develop that further. So not just the printed materials with the model units, but video information and curriculum maps, I think, is what's been the most asked for.
Yeah, we're doing the same in DC. We have the curricular resources up on our educator portal, and then we have tons of video available for teachers and principals to observe and dissect.
Yep, and I just want to add, but our website is not user-friendly, so let me just say that up front. So it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, and so there's work underway to try and change that, but just wanted to say that before people start trying.
I'll talk to you about our educator portal afterwards.
Okay.
And Delia, did you have something to say?
We have an educator portal for our network, but one of the challenges for us is trying not to duplicate the wheel. There is water everywhere, and there are a lot of resources. And every time we think, oh, we should develop that, we realize someone else has done that. And so our challenge is to sort of keep track of everything that's there and then refer people to those materials.
Yep. Great. Got another question in the back, and then we'll go way around.
Yes, good morning, Loretta Goodwin, American Youth Policy Forum. I just wanted to follow up on exactly what Alan, you and Delia were talking about, because I'm just wondering, as you were saying that, I was thinking of New York that has a really functional portal.
Yep.
So I'm wondering what's the level of collaboration at the state level of possible other states that you're collaborating with to learn from them and possibly use some of the same resources?
Yeah, very fair. We have often referred folks to the New York portal that you mentioned. So we've looked at it. I've looked at it. It's well organized, has a wealth of material and information. But to your point, I don't think we've collaborated enough. So I think there's more opportunity for us to do that. I think it's an opportunity for improvement. But there have been some conversations between different agencies. I know we have spent a lot of time in conversation with Maryland, Delaware. We've got a group of folks, team going out to Denver or to Colorado, to the Colorado State Education Agency. So there's some collaboration that's taking place, but not nearly enough. And so it's an opportunity for us.
I think that's one of the benefits of my district collaborating with Aspen Institute is that we do gather regularly for the retreats, and for me it's a reprieve. It's an opportunity to step back and reflect on the work that we're doing. And learn from what other districts
Absolutely.
are doing. So, thanks.
And it's one of those things where I feel like the opportunities are going to be growing. You know, really, one of the advantages of Common Core is that it's common across so many places. Before, even just, we saw that the slight idiosyncrasies across states just made it really hard to really share resources at the level of practicality and depth that makes it most useful for folks. So it's an exciting opportunity, but it's also a shift that it's just taking some time to sort of develop those sea legs and those muscles. We have a question up front. And Mike, did you want to add to that in the meantime? Sure. And then.
Yeah, just really briefly, your question about collaboration among states, I think this predates Alan's arrival at the department, but back in 2010, Massachusetts, New York, and Rhode Island tried to figure out how to pool their race to the top resources around model instructional units. That turned out to be enormously challenging, and they were not able to do that. But what they did do is we worked with them, but among the 3 states, they created a rubric for evaluating the quality and alignment of instructional materials. Achieve picked that up. There are now over 20 states that have been using that. New York used it to support their curriculum development process. It is now one of the tools that the new organization, Ed Reports, is building on. That's supposed to become a consumer reports for instructional materials. So that collaboration has paid off quite a bit in terms of shaping how people look at alignment. Still room for a lot more, but don't lose the good impact that you've had.
Absolutely.
Good morning. I'm Gwen Benson, Associate Dean for School and Community Partnerships, the College of Education at Georgia State University. And I'm wondering how you might be engaging your higher education institutions, specifically your colleges of education, and supporting your work. Sounds like you're doing really wonderful work, and I know you have those great universities around you. So how might you involve those in the work you're doing?
Well, in Massachusetts, I'm thinking of a couple of ways. One is in the development of the Massachusetts framework. There were definitely higher ed representatives as part of that work, as well as others, teachers, administrators. I'm not sure about the parent piece, but higher ed was definitely part of that. We also have an advisory group that serves both agencies, the Department of Higher Education and our elementary and secondary education department, on a number of issues. So educator evaluation, we've made changes to Ed Prep program approval. They've been involved in that process, and so they're intimately working with us on a number of different collaborations, from the standards piece to the licensure piece to the evaluation piece and the program approval piece.
I think another great opportunity for collaboration is with training the next generation of teachers. I encourage all of our schools to have student teachers at their buildings so that they can work side by side our master teachers and begin to gain exposure to the standards and learn how the shifts are implemented. Many of our superintendents also are becoming quite good friends with the directors of teacher education at the local colleges, and collaborating in that way.
You know, in the case of English language learners and other students who are far behind, the colleges and universities have been a great support from the standpoint of research. We're part of a consortium, Understanding Language, that is headquartered at Stanford University. And there are a number of partners who are at the universities who have great research, and the challenge is to turn that research into practice and to then help teachers understand what the research means to them. And I think that's an important piece of work that we sort of focus on the teacher training sometimes and don't look at the research that comes out of higher ed, and there's a real need for that.
So I'm going to take a quick minute to reply as well. I had the opportunity to meet with a number of ed school deans and leaders a couple of years ago, specifically around the Common Core, and my big takeaway was that I think that most of the folks that I was speaking to that day sort of saw Common Core as something that was getting imposed. It was going to be the next thing that they were going to be blamed for, or they were going to be asked to comply with, and there not many among them had either been presented with or taken the opportunity to really dig into the standards themselves and to look at them and the implications for preparing the next generation of teachers. And so I partnered with then Ed School Dean, now Vice President at Lipscomb University, Candace McQueen, who's leading some of this work in Nashville, Tennessee. And we created a self-assessment for teacher, educator, faculty, just to look at, how well is my course preparing students to teach the Common Core? So really just with some very basic questions around, do students have a chance to aspiring teachers look at the relevant standards? I mean, do they read them? Are they a topic of conversation in our course? But also looking at the level of discourse and the level of writing that's asked for in the Common Core, and asking whether that's reflected in the kind of preparation the teachers are getting. And so we've been excited. Lots of folks have been picking that up and just using it in an informal way, because I do think part of something that I worry we lose sometimes with Common Core. It's an incredibly, I think, inspiring document. It's an exciting aspirational vision for what we want students to be able to do. And I think we lose that sometimes with, well, our test score is going to drop, who's going to be accountable? And so trying to get teacher prep faculty, I just think, invested and owning that, I think, is a huge opportunity. Other questions? Yeah, we've got one right here. Hello, Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Sclafani, and my question is exactly that. How do you, particularly those of you working with practitioners, help them learn how to address content at the depth required by the Common Core state standards? Because that has not been previously required of them, and as you say, they're kind of lost on content pedagogy. And so how are you addressing that issue? Finding the time is one thing.
Yes. I think that's a great question. One of the things that we're doing at the elementary school level, in particular at grades 3, 4, and 5, is beginning to departmentalize our schools. The content is broad, it requires a lot. It's, for a teacher to be fluent in ELA and math is heavy. So now the woman who's sitting right next to you, Principal Jackson at Seton, one of our highest performing principals in the city, can tell you more about.
You want to move to Massachusetts?
You can't steal her. Is department.
No shame here. Yeah.
Is leading the charge for us with departmentalization. Her school actually serves as a demonstration site for that. In just 2 short years, math scores have grown over 25%. So one way that we're tackling that is through departmentalization, which allows teachers to become specialists in one particular content area instead of trying to tackle it all.
I think a couple of things come to mind, but one is reflecting on the results of our spring assessment data, looking for patterns and trends where their students are challenged the most, and then adapting and tailoring the professional development offerings that we do and provide to teachers in those areas where we see that there are problems. But I would also add working with our higher ed partners to make sure that part of the ed prep programs are familiar with the shifts, and then seeking their help to make sure that they're a part of the solution in preparing the teachers that come to us. As a former superintendent, what I struggle with the most, particularly in an urban center that was underperforming, was the work of turnaround, which is so different than just regular instruction, but making sure that people had, not the right pedagogy, but then the grit to endure some of the challenges that they would face in an urban setting. So trying to approach it from both ends, both from training and preparation.
So we've got a question right here, and while that's coming, I'll just say, I think the departmentalization, that trend, is really going to be something to watch over the next few years. The depth, especially the delta between what the math standards are asking for, and I think what at least this generation of teachers has been prepared for, is really forcing some places to look at how can we give folks that focus and make it, so that they really do have the time and the focus to learn that depth. So I just think it's something really to be looking for, and I think it's exciting that you're doing that work in DC. Yep.
Hi, Luann McNabb with the National Council of Teachers of English. Delia, I thought it was interesting when you said Latino parents want annual assessments, I guess testing. When right now I see a trend towards knocking out a lot of tests because a lot of parents feel their students are getting over-tested. But I've also read that a lot of teachers now are using assessments like on a daily basis or weekly basis through portfolio. Can you address if Latino parents would be willing to look at that if they do indeed reduce the number of tests, so they don't overburden students?
I think the first thing to acknowledge is that parents in general, and Latino parents are just like other parents in general, don't differentiate among the tests. So they're not going to know that those are diagnostic tests and that the state test is something different and that, PARCC is something that you add on. So I think we'd have to turn that question around. When we hear parents talk about too much testing, my experience has been, and this is my experience, that it's usually, I want to get in trouble here, more upper income parents who read the newspapers more or who talk to somebody in the grocery store line about it. It's not the parents that, it's not that all Latinos are low income, but the parents we're focused on, the parents of English language learners, are often new to this country. Testing was something that was important in their country, and they want to know how their kids are doing, and to them, getting the test results tells them how their kids are doing. So it's much more simplistic than talking about the different tests, because I don't think they view it on that level. They really care about how's my kid doing, and they see the results, and it's their tool. I also will add that in looking at polling among Latino parents, when asked if the tests are hard enough or they should be harder or there should be more of them, they tend to say there should be more of them and they should be harder because I want my child to be challenged. So again, it's on a different level of understanding than I think educators have of assessment.
So I'm just curious, are these, how hot or not is testing in your state, in your district? Like, what, is it a big conversation right now? Not so much?
The seat's getting warm just from the conversation. But too much testing is certainly a part of the cry that we hear from the field in Massachusetts. And I don't want to oversimplify, but short version, we're going to do a study here very soon. We've done some preliminary work to get a feel. We surveyed educators in the field to get their initial reaction to the too much testing cry. And then we've got a follow-on component from that where we'll bring in an independent researcher to help us take a look at a more in-depth level. But what I think as a practitioner, what happens the most is this notion of test prep, right? So again, local control, districts decide, schools decide for themselves how they want to approach teaching and learning in their buildings and in their districts. But the overemphasis on test preparation or trying to get kids ready for the annual high stakes assessment can sometimes go too far. And what I think is that if you teach to a high standard, you provide kids who are not on grade level with the right supports, and you prepare them critically, that they will do well without all the added test prep work. But the short of it is, in Massachusetts, we do hear it, we've heard it a lot, and so we're trying to get an independent study so that we can attack it in an informed manner going forward.
Yeah, we've got a question right here.
Yeah, hi, Rob Richardson. Part of the conversation was around reaching parents in the community and getting them involved. I wonder if you could talk to where that has happened well and where the potential is for that to happen even better moving forward.
I'm going to point to Denver Public Schools. I think they've done a terrific job of including their parents and everybody else from the outset, where all the processes that surrounded implementing high standards were really discussed at the school level and with parents as the decisions were being made. So I always point to them as a good example. I think there's potential everywhere. The work, we've been doing work in New York, in Colorado, in Illinois, and in California and Florida. And our approach has been to work through community organizations because they are trusted sources for parents. And sometimes the parents we work with, immigrant parents and low-income parents, are more comfortable working through those organizations at the beginning than working through the schools at first. Our goal is to get them to work with the schools and to be in partnership with the schools, but it's also to get them to be educated consumers about the education their children are getting. So it's about knowing the questions to ask about what their child is receiving. It's about knowing generally what to expect. And they don't have to be experts in curriculum or testing, but they have to have the what would you call it, the agency to feel like they can go in and ask about the curriculum or ask about a textbook or ask what the test results mean and what's going to happen the next year. So I think those sort of simple approaches are the best ones to start to get parents involved in what's happening.
Certainly in Massachusetts, with 1,800 schools, about 400 districts, we see good parent engagement and outreach across the Commonwealth. But there are probably 2 or 3 things that stand out the most for me, where I've seen it work the best. Is one, where we don't make judgments about the station in life of parents. We accept them for who they are without value judgments about their station in life. That you go where they are, and so that you not build all of the interactions about them coming to a school, coming to a classroom, coming to a district, but you go where they are. And 3, you try and connect them with the resources in the community where their needs may not be being met. And so I think when you do that and you're consistent about that and you help them, you recognize that they are a critical partner in the work that you're trying to get done in educating their children. They're sending you the best that, their cherished, treasured child, and we have a responsibility to work with them in a collaborative way without making judgments about their station in life.
Yeah, going where they are has been a key medium for our work in DCPS. Our teachers, through our partnership with the Flamboyant Foundation, have been conducting hundreds of thousands of home visits. There are schools where every teacher has at least visited the homes of 3 of the students in their class. So it's about building relationships and going where they are. That's the initial critical first step.
Well, and just to connect Amanda and Dahlia's comments back to Denver Public Schools, I think one of the things that I think Denver has been really deliberate about is engagement strategy, really comprehensively, in especially around their educators, because parents are going to get most of their information from teachers and the principals in their school. And so making sure that the teachers and principals feel comfortable and knowledgeable and confident talking about these things, I think, is a critical step in that. And another shameless plug for Aspen Institute material. I think out on the table there's a publication called Beyond Buy-In, and it's about engagement strategies in Denver, just because it has been a place that we've watched as well and been really impressed by. So Sarah, so I'm going to finish out. Did you have a question?
Yeah, off the sheet on the CNA,
If you could,
federally funded R&D center. It's a question for Mike. The federal government has played a big role in all of this, both direct and indirect. What could you see in a reauthorization that would have a positive or negative impact on what we've been hearing here?
Good question.
could you see a reauthorization?
Yeah, so when did you think that was going to occur? Yeah, right. I don't quite know what's in store for reauthorization. I do think, the federal government, on the one hand, has played an incredibly important role in the movement towards higher standards. Going back to when Lamar Alexander was secretary and funded 40-plus states to develop their own academic standards. The Clinton administration, through Goals 2000 and ESEA, played an important role in advancing that. And since 1994, states have been required to have content standards for all kids. They've been required to test students in that, and they've received funding to underwrite both of those efforts. I make that point because much of the debate about the federal role right now is that somehow along comes Common Core, right? Probably the only standards that I can remember that were developed with 0 federal funds, right? And are now part of a giant federal conspiracy. Right? I testified for a Georgia Legislative Committee a couple of weeks ago, painting this history in some detail, and ended up saying to them, look, people are telling you that the Common Core is a giant federal overreach and that you should get rid of the Common Core in order to solve that. And I said, you can go ahead and get rid of the Common Core, and you will still have a federal requirement to have standards. You will still have a requirement to have tests. You will still continue to take money for that. If you think that's getting rid of the federal government, you don't understand, right, the environment in which you're operating. That didn't go over all that well, but that's the truth. So I say that because the most important thing to happen in the reauthorization debate around this set of issues is for people to start with a common understanding of where we are, how we got here, and what the federal role has been. The second thing I'd say is, from my own experience in the Clinton administration, trying several times to have national standards and tests, is there is an extraordinarily delicate balance that has to be struck between what the federal government does and what states do. I think most observers would agree, we'll put it this way, I think, right, we're out of balance right now, and that we've got to figure out a way to keep the states out in front leading and the federal government supporting, and I think that's going to be important to address in reauthorization. How that happens, don't know, but I think that's where things need to go.
All right, I think you've framed our next panel discussion, but I want to give each of our panelists a chance to close out and really, quickly, I'm hoping you could each share two things. One, what makes you most hopeful about this work right now? And the second is, what's the most important thing for you to focus on in this work in the next 6 months and year? What's got your attention? So Delia, will you start us on that? We'll go right across.
Sure. The most hopeful thing I've seen is teachers hard at work implementing the Common Core and kind of ignoring or being maybe almost oblivious to the conversation at the on the airwaves and sort of wondering what's that about. I'm busy doing this and this is important to me. And then we actually did a video, we shot a video with kids where there's been a really, we think, effective implementation of Common Core, and asked the kids what was different. And very innocently, they talk about all the things they've learned and how different it is, and it's very hopeful for me to see that. What we're going to be working on over the next 6 months is the consistency of the different strands of, I'll call it education reform for lack of anything else. We're really concerned that we pull everything together to work together rather than having a focus on standards, a focus on curriculum, a focus on testing, as if they're all separate things. And I think from a policy perspective, the most important thing is to figure out how everything works together and not knock it out of balance.
Great. Amanda.
I'm most excited about the opportunity for all kids across this country to have access to the good stuff. This is a civil right matter, and I hope that this nation will stay the course. If we are going to compete globally, we need the Common Core in our schools. On a personal note, I'm excited about the space that we're in where we don't have all of the answers. As a result, we're studying more, we're questioning each other more. We ourselves are annotating text. Today I'll be reading this, letting the text take center stage, a Shanahan article with my superintendents. And that's a great place to be as a professional educator. And I would say over the next 6 months, it's going to be streamlining our assessments, our PBAs, so that it isn't overkill, that it isn't testing all the time, but so that it makes sense for the teachers and most importantly, the students that we serve.
I agree with both, and just for me on a personal level, being in classrooms, seeing children up close and personal and seeing the learning that's taking place is absolutely beyond description. There are no words when you see it, and you see the potential for the changes in their lives and their futures. In terms of the next 6 months, I think about the pace of reform. Again, our commissioner has been smart about trying to make some adjustments based on the feedback that we get from the field. without giving away the store, so to speak. So we want to remain true to the reform agenda and what we've outlined to get done, but it has been necessary to make some adjustments in terms of timelines and when we thought things might be due. Being sensitive to the pace of reform and continually to work on coherence. I mean, that is, as a former superintendent, and what I hear from the most from the field is people want to see this as seamless work, not these random acts in isolation. And so that's an ongoing struggle for me.
Terrific. Well, you know, just to sound your note, Amanda, I think all students actually are more likely to get the good stuff with the hard work and commitment that you all bring to this. So thank you for your service to public education. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for being here. Thanks to Mike. And go to careerreadyschools.org and let us know how it works. So thanks, everybody, for joining us today.